Hello, it's Josh Kelly with Joshua Kelly Piano, and this week I want to talk a little bit about why phrasing is so important within music. So I had a couple of people come to me this week, a couple of students come to me with very similar questions regarding why we kind of need to take it up on ourselves to make the effort to put phrasing correctly within the context of the music that we're playing, whatever composer that may be. And the question really wasn't directed specifically at phrasing, it was to do with, general performance marks, dynamics, tempo, all that stuff, why we need to kind of be faithful to that. And it's very interesting because I remember having very similar thought processes myself on my undergraduate degree. I particularly remember being in a masterclass and not being as faithful to the score as perhaps I should have been. And the person doing the masterclass told me that I should treat everything on the score, not only the notes, but the articulation, the dynamics, everything, as being the metaphorical word of God. And this stuck with me, up until this day, because it was very powerful what he said. And my primary tutor in Leeds, was very big on language. His primary language wasn't English, and in many ways he had probably a better command of English than I have and did. And he always used to compare musical language with actual verbal language, in our case English. And he'd always use sentences to demonstrate the phrase that I was playing or the music I was playing at the time, whatever composer it was. And he'd contrast German with English and so on and so forth. And I kind of, with my students, also do a similar exercise, and I use two primary sentences just to show how phrasing or punctuation within music is very important, and it's incredibly important because it expresses the meaning of the phrase, it expresses the meaning of the music that you're trying to portray to the audience. So I use two sentences, and I'll put them on screen just in case I don't come across within my speech correctly. But the first one is, I ate my dear grandma, and with the punctuation it's I ate my dear grandma. So the first one obviously is coming across as if you're some kind of cannibal, as if you should be put in prison for things that are disgusting. And then the second one is you telling your grandma that you've eaten, so that that you're full. So depending on where you put the comma in the sentence is obviously very important because it changes the meaning of the sentence completely. And the second one that I use, which is kind of fun, is the student said the teacher is crazy, and the student said the teacher is crazy. So in this sentence you get the impression that on the first time that the student's saying that the teacher's crazy, that the teacher himself or herself is crazy. And the second sentence with the punctuation added in, it's the teacher saying about the student that he's or her is crazy. So it completely changes the meaning, and depending on where you put punctuation obviously depends on really what the sentence means. Now, we've all heard of the expression, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, and that's very true for a lot of language really. So it's the same in English as it is in music. Depending on how you phrase, where you start a phrase, where you end a phrase, depends on what the music means, what the expression is. And really it can change the mood, it can change the entire dynamic or the entire mood, the entire character of a piece or a section of a piece. And it's interesting, I was reading this week also, it just happens that this has all converged this week, but I'm reading the biography of Chopin. It's Chopin, Prince of the Romantics by Adam Zamoyski, and it's a fantastic read. It really has been incredible up until this point. I'm probably just about halfway through. But I read a quote, and I'm going to quote from this book, but it was a little bit about what Chopin thought about phrasing himself, and his take on this was, and this is Zamoyski talking about Chopin, for him the key to expression was phrasing, for music was only a language. He likened poor phrasing to someone reciting a poem he knows by heart in a language he does not understand. According to Chopin, some musicians betrayed through their playing that music was not their native language, merely a skill that they had picked up. So for Chopin, and I knew for a number of years now, I've known that Chopin had a very particular approach to phrasing, and that it was very important to him how he brought that across. But it's interesting to see it in kind of black and white that Chopin really thought phrasing was the climax, if you like, of expression. You know, it was his way of expressing meaning through music, through phrasing. So I'm going to just play, and we're going to go over just two examples. One is from a piece that my student brought to me, and then another example is from a piece that I'm currently learning at the moment. Both of them are Chopin waltzes, so it ties in very well. So the first one is the one that my student was playing, and it's or learning, and it's waltz number 3, the Opus 34 number 2. It's the very famous one in A minor. And there's just 4 bars which are very good to go over in terms of the phrasing because it's quite unusual. So the phrase in the right hand, the melody is. Okay, that's the melody. So all together, actually, I'll put the left hand with it as well. So there's about 4 phrases there. Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 individual phrases, but they're over 4 bars, but they're kind of broken. So, for instance, the first phrase starts on the penultimate bar, so, and takes you through to the second bar, and I think it's very interesting the way Chopin has written this because it kind of creates this tension and release. It drags you into the music and releases you from it. And I always think of the sea. If you ever think of the sea when the waves are coming in, the waves come in, and if you're ever in the sea, it pulls you and then it pulls you back, and then it pulls you and pulls you back even more. And that's how, you know, people kind of get dragged out to sea. And it's interesting because I kind of feel that within the music. It gives that the idea that you kind of... and it creates a gap before you're then drawn back into it. I always think if we were to write this classically, if we were to write this phrasing as if it was every bar, every 2 bars, as you would expect, you know, what would that sound like and what kind of character would that give? What mood would that give? So let's just give that a go. So just changing a couple of the notes there in the right hand to make the phrasing easier to kind of comprehend and easier to play. That's certainly more classical and more of an obvious choice. But that's not what he does. He does. And it creates this dance-like aspect to it, a dance element to it, and it's really fascinating, and I really like it for that reason. And this isn't just pertaining to this piece; it's scattered throughout every kind of compositional area that Chopin was involved in, whether it be a waltz or a polonaise or a ballad or a nocturne or whatever it is. And we always get this kind of tension and release with Chopin, not just harmonically, but in the phrasing as well. So if you're on this piece, just take a look at the phrase 1, phrase 2, phrase 3, phrase 4, and that's it. And where you place the natural accentation or the natural accents within the bar depends on where the phrasing is and what the kind of natural weight is for each of the bars. So, right, so on the first phrase, the first beat is the heaviest accent, then the second beat is the heaviest accent, then the first beat is the heaviest accent, then the second beat is the heaviest accent, and I think that's what gives this kind of pull and this tension within it. So that's very fascinating, and just take a look, and it's just another example of why phrasing is so important, especially within romantic music and within Chopin's music specifically. So the waltz that I'm currently on and currently learning is the one that precedes that, the one in A flat, the Opus 34 number 1. And there's a phrase here, and Chopin changes the phrasing, so let's see if I can bring that across now. So if you notice that on the first time, the phrasing in the right hand is... So you've got phrases every 2 bars, which is kind of the natural, what you'd expect. And then he changes it up a little bit, where you have this... And it creates this new, fresh, breezy aspect to it, where you have more space and more room to breathe. So you have this... and then... which kind of creates a new thing within the music, because obviously the notes are more or less repeated. It's just phrasing it differently. And again, this is just an example of how phrasing is so important within music. Also, on the trills there at the top, you have these accent marks. So it's kind of just bringing out the phrasing more, using the natural accents within the phrase to create more of a weight within the various phrases there. So we can see that Chopin uses phrasing here as a way to express and give a new brush stroke. I always think of Chopin's music as being parallel to like a painter or something like that. He's using these strokes to create different textures within the music. Obviously, one of the ways he does that is by changing the phrasing from every 2 bars to every bar. And that gives a new dimension to the music. It creates a new character and expresses that character differently. So whenever you have phrasing within your music, just be careful to express and explore that phrasing the way the composer intended to, but also try experimenting with it and, changing ways to play the phrasing. Can you play the phrasing every 2 bars if it's written, every 1 bar? How can you experiment with phrasing to make it more fun for yourself and to also learn about why phrasing is so important. So I hope that's been insightful into why phrasing is so important. I'm sure this will come up again in the future. But until next time, I wish you well with your practice.